Okay, welcome back to MTG Life, everyone. So, we have another Commander deck tech we're going to do today, and that is Marchesa the Black Rose. For those of you who don't know, she's a red, blue, black, and one generic for a 3/3 human wizard with Dethrone. Whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for most life, put a 1/1 counter on it. Other creatures you control have Dethrone. Whenever a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, so first off, the dethrone ability, pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to make this deck to where we're going to play stuff that's going to cause us to lose life, because in this kind of deck, you don't want to be leading in terms of life. You don't want to sit here and have to you want to be able to attack them to get these 1/1 counters. So we're going to be playing a few cards that are going to make us lose life, just so that we can do that and still get some effects and have our creatures still do this. Now, her other ability is you don't necessarily have to do it with Dethrone. Pretty much what you could do is you could do it more of a 1/1 counter based deck, but a lot of that's in green, and we don't run green in this. And it's at the beginning of the next end step. So if, say, your creature dies in the combat phase of your opponent's turn, it will come back on their end step. Alright, let's get into our rares we got here. The first one we have is Fire Drinker Satyr. He's a 1 red for a 2/1 Satyr Shaman with whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to you. You can pay a red and 1 generic. It gets +1/+0 until end of turn and deals 1 damage to you. Largely, we're not really going to attack with this as much as you would think. What we're mainly going to do is we're going to pay that ability just to actually probably buff him up, and possibly not even for any other use than just to have it deal 1 damage to us. Because like I said, we don't want to stay very high up in the terms of life. We want to be able to be ahead in creatures, but not in life, so that we can get it down to where it's just us one-on-one with someone else instead of 3 against 1. Because if we're low in life, they're going to leave you alone as much. So he's in here just so that we can lose life and stuff. Alright, the next card we have here is Mind Swipe. It's a blue and a red and X generic mana for an instant with counter target spell unless its controller pays X. Mind Swipe deals X damage to that spell's controller. Okay, so this is a late game spell, more closer to when the game's starting to wrap up. When you have plenty of mana and so does your opponent, so they're going to start playing out their bigger creatures. So you can easily tap out all of your mana for this to deal damage to them. Honestly, this here is a burn spell and a counter spell, so it works very well depending on how much mana you're willing to throw into it. So the next card we have here is Tillinali's Skin Shifter. Anyways, he's a red and 2 generic mana for a 0/1 human shaman with haste. Whenever Tillinali's Skin Shifter attacks, it becomes a copy of another target non-legendary attacking creature until end turn. When we attack, we are going to attack. So what we want is stuff that goes on. This guy can become larger, and he'll of course get the 1/1 counter with Dethrone, making him not just a 0/1. Eventually he'll become a body all his own and be able to get buffed and all that stuff. So next group of cards, we're done with the rares. What we're doing is we're now getting into cards that we're going to do when they enter the battlefield. So like I said, we're going to have lots of cards that will enter the battlefield. They'll do effects and such, but then we're going to want to attack at least once with that creature so that it gets the 1/1 counter, so that if your opponent tries to kill it, board wipe or anything, it will die and then come back at the end step and activate that when it enters the battlefield ability again. The first one is Denrava Horror. He's a blue-black 4 generic mana for a 4/4 horror with when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent to its owner's hand, then that player discards a card. If your opponent has no cards in hand and you bounce their biggest guy on the board, then they have to discard it. It just gets rid of it very easily. Here's a really good blocker for this kind of deck and helps generate mana that we need to play out more spells and stuff very quick. Because what we want to do is we want to play out as many creatures as quickly to activate these abilities so that we can attack the people with the most life or tied for it. Because in the beginning, everyone will have 40 life, of course, so you want to at least just attack. So here's Sailor of Means. So blue to generic mana for a human pirate 1/4. So he's already a decent blocker for 3 mana. When he enters battlefield, create a colorless treasure artifact token that taps, sacrifice it, add a mana of any color to your mana pool. That's mana fixing right there already. It helps fix our mana that we need to do and everything else and gives us a good blocker. So we can easily attack with him once, make him a 2/5, makes him an even better blocker. And then when he finally eventually dies, he'll just come back and give us another treasure. And hopefully we'll get a chance to attack with him again, and so on, so on, so on. I don't have a card in here to give anything in here vigilance, so if you guys would feel like you guys would want, if you guys were to make this deck, I would probably recommend putting in a card that would give all your creatures vigilance or something like that, so that you can attack and still be able to block. Like if you were able to attack with Sailor Amines immediately and be able to block immediately after, I mean, he'd be a 2/5. That's great for 3 mana. The next card is Prosperous Pirates. He's a blue, 4 generic mana for a 3/4 human pirate with when it enters the battlefield, create 2 colorless treasure artifact tokens. Now that's even better mana fixing. Yes, it's 5 mana for 3/4, but if we are able to get it off at least for when it enters the battlefield the first time, and then when it dies and comes back, that's a total of 4 mana for the equivalent of just 5 mana. It's very good, very useful. That should not be in here. I don't know why this is. There's a Bond Beetle in here. I don't know why. Weird. Kind of messes up a little bit more of. Oh well. Alright, so the next card we have is Aspiring Aeronaut. It's a blue 3 generic mana for a 1/2 human artificer with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Okay, the fact is the tokens won't be able to come back because they just disappear. But this guy, every time he comes back in after you cast him the first time, will continuously generate more blockers for us. And if those blockers do attack, those Thopters do attack and don't get blocked or killed, they will get larger with that Deep Throne ability as well. So the next one we have is pretty much the same. It's a Gearcrafter. He's a red 2 generic mana for a 2/1 human artificer that does the exact same thing as the Aspiring Aeronaut. Exact same reason why we run it in here. Now we're done with the enter the battlefields. We're with when they die now. We're into stuff that does stuff when they die. Because eventually these creatures will get large enough that your opponents will start blocking them or killing them off. So we need cards that will do something when that happens. Like Malfeld Twins. He's a black and 5 generic mana for a 4/4 zombie. When it dies, put 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield. Now, we attack with him immediately, he becomes a 5/5. If he dies, we get 2 blockers that can get larger whenever they attack. Now the next card we have here is Mortis Dog. He's a black and 3 generic mana for a 2/2 Hound with whenever it attacks it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So the first turn it attacks, if it attacks the player with the most life, immediately it's attacking for 5 damage. It becomes a 5/3 when it attacks then. And every other turn it gets stronger by 1. And when it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target player loses life equal to its power. This is a late game. If you're able to make it unblockable, be able to get it to attack several times, you can deal a lot of damage, get it very powerful, and then just let them kill it or sacrifice it yourself with something. And immediately you could deal who knows how much damage, and odds are if you want to do it, play an instant that has something with sacrifice, something as an extra cost to it, like an Altar's Reap or something like that, when it's attacking. So, like right after it's attacked, so that when it'll deal the damage, then you can immediately sacrifice it. Like if you were to do this immediately, an opponent would take 5 damage from it, and then lose 5 damage from it going away. Now the next card is Oculus. He's a blue and 1 generic mana for a 1/1 Homunculus. When it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. It just fixes some card draw, lets us get to more stuff that we need, and if we're able to get this going off multiple times, we can just use it for a continuous card draw. Now the next card is Mirror. It's a 2 generic mana for a 1/1 artifact creature Mirror. When it is put into a graveyard, you create a 1/1 colorless Mirror artifact creature token. Now then, it just gives us more blockers. Immediately attacking with it for after it comes out for 2 mana, it's dealing 2 damage. Now the next card is Caustic Hound. He's a black and 5 generic mana for a 4/4 Hound. When it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each player loses 4 life. Okay, so this affects everyone. So it's not just like, if say we're down by 1 life and this dies, we're still going to stay behind just a smidgen, just enough that we can continue to activate the dethrone ability. That's what we want to do because we want to build up our creatures and activate these abilities so we can win through some weird little tricks. Now the next one we run is Lawless Broker. There we go. Black and 2 generic mana for an Aetherborn Rogue 3/2. When it dies, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, so first off, it buffs one of our creatures, and it immediately if that creature doesn't have a 1/1 counter on it, it immediately activates Marchesa's Dethrone ability, so that when it dies, it brings it back. Now that we're getting into some of our other stuff, like Spin Crusher. 2 generic mana for a 0/2. Whenever it blocks, put a 1/1 counter on it. It becomes a good blocker, becomes a good attacker, especially if it's attacking the player with the most life, so it can just continue to get larger. Remove a 1/1 counter from it, and it is unblockable. So we immediately attack with it. Hopefully it deals damage, then we can immediately attack again and remove a 1/1 counter. And yeah, you just hitting them for 1, unblockable, but you can find a way to give it more 1/1 counters and just remove one from it every time it attacks, and it immediately gets one brought back because of the dethrone. Now that like I said, when we do attack, when we get to the point where we're ready to attack, we're going to be attacking a lot, basically with everything. So we have cards with the raid ability in here, such as Stormfleet Aerialist. He's a blue and 1 generic mana for a human pirate 1/2 with flying. Raid. Whenever it enters battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it if you attacked with a creature this turn. By the time you play this, you're going to be attacking. You're going to want to attack immediately, get the 1/1 counter on your creature, and then this comes in as a 2/3 with flying, which can then immediately attack, and it's got more evasion than creatures on the ground. So then you can get in and deal that damage and give it more counters. Now the next card here is Navigator's Ruin. It's a blue and 2 generic mana for an enchantment with raid. When at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent puts the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. No, we're not running mill, but like I said, we will be attacking. We will be doing it to get those 1/1 counters. And even if we just attack with one creature, it will either get a 1/1 counter or have a 1/1 counter. So it will immediately activate the raid ability. And if they block and kill it, it's got a 1/1 counter, so it will just come back. So it's no consequence to us. Like I said, we're going to be able to attack, and they'll be able to come back. So there's no reason not to attack with this raid ability. I mean, activate it as many times. It has no consequence to you, because the creature just comes back at the end step. The only thing you actually have to worry about is if your opponent tries to wipe your board. Say they attack with everything, you attack with everything, or they do, and you lose all your creatures, but they come back. That's the biggest part where you have to be worried is until your next turn, is that they're going to try to board wipe you. Because by then they have no more 1/1 counters on them, so if they die, they won't be able to come back. Now the next card we have here is Raider's Wake. He's a black and 3 generic mana for enchantment with whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. Okay, this card is more of an end game. It's getting closer to the end of the game play. You don't want to play it early on because you want to stay below everyone else in life. So you're going to want to play it later on to just do a little extra mess with them. Same with the Navigator's Ruin. Navigator's Ruin and Raider's Wake are more of a later game. Mainly the Raider's Wake, because you want to wait until you're ready to attack, till you have plenty of counters on your creatures, and until it's like you one-on-one or just 2 other people. This way you can focus more on someone. Now the next card here is one that's going to definitely be a late game play. You're not going to want to do it immediately. It's going to be a late game if you're not sure you're going to be able to do something, and it's going to be Thief of Blood. It's 2 black, 4 generic mana for a 1/1 vampire with flying, and as it enters the battlefield, remove all counters from all permanents. It enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it for each counter removed this way. A lot of our creatures are going to have 1/1 counters, and with that flying, it gives it great evasion. There's no telling how many 1/1 counters this here could enter the battlefield as a 6/6, 7/7, 8/8. Who knows what it could become? And then when it attacks, it's going to get more 1/1 counters. But what's even better about it is that it's going to die. That if it does die, If it becomes giant and large enough that your opponents immediately want to remove it, it's going to immediately have 1/1 counters on it. This here, though, could be your downfall. This card could be the downfall in this deck, because when it enters the battlefield, say it dies after you played it and it had like 9 1/1 counters on it, so your opponent removed it. At your end step, it's going to come back, and then it's going to take off all the counters from all the creatures you have. At that point, if your opponent tries to board wipe you, all those creatures are gone. Or, except for the Thief of Blood, but then when it comes back, it's only just going to be a 1/1. So, Thief of Blood can continuously keep coming back and getting larger every time it comes back, but it's also a weak point where you could possibly lose. This is maybe an early play in the game to get a high flying creature out, but to not lose a lot of creatures. When you know when your opponents are tapped out and you know that you can get back here, because you want to be able to attack with your creatures at least one more time, then to give them 1/1 counter so that if they die, they'll continue to come back. Now the next card in here is one that we play because it's going to be really good to use for if it continuously comes back multiple times, is Cyclone Sire. He's a blue and 4 generic mana for an elemental with flying. It's a 3/4 with when it dies you may put 3 1/1 counters on target land you control. If you do, that land becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste that's still a land. Okay, this here can pair up very well with Thief of Blood. If you're able to get Cyclone Sire off multiple times, it can pair up with Thief of Blood very well. But on its own, it can also go very well because it gives you more blockers and gives you more creatures to attack with. It gives you more options to use. And in the late game, it also lets you easily attack your opponents without having to worry about them hitting you for lethal, because you'll still have blockers open. Now, the next card we have in here is Kitesail Courser. He's a blue and 1 generic mana for a 2/1 human pirate. It has flying as long as it's attacking. It is just a really good low drop flyer when it's attacking, and it can easily get larger as it attacks. Now we do run some other cards with haste in here, such as Rakdos Shred Freak. You can pay either 2 black, 2 red, or any combination thereof for a 2/1 human berserker with haste. So immediately you play it out after you've had a Marchesa out, and it becomes a 3/2 with haste for 2 mana. Very good and very useful. And immediately when it comes back into play, it will have haste, but it comes in on the end step, so it doesn't matter as much unless it's on an opponent's turn. Now the next card we have here is a card that I really would like to see used in here, that I assume will be very useful, and that is Arc Runner. He's a red and 2 generic mana for a 5/1 elemental ox with haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Arc Runner. Okay, so some people watching this may be sitting here thinking, why do you have him in here when he sacrifices at the end step? Because here's what happens. Immediately, when you can play him for 3 mana. If Marchesa is out, he can attack immediately and deal 6 damage as a 6/2. Yes, at the end step you sacrifice him, but then he'll come back and then you can immediately attack again on your combat step and make him a 6/1, sacrifice him, he comes back, and so on and so on and so on. And he'll come back on your opponent's end step. Now, next card here is Spike Jester. He's a black and a red for a 3/1 Goblin Warrior with haste. 2 mana, haste, becomes a 4/2 damage. Next card is Caderic Creeper. I probably pronounced it wrong. It's a blue, black, and a red for a 2/3 Death Touch Horror. It can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. This here can get very overpowered. For 3 mana, it immediately attacks. It becomes a 3/4, which is a decent blocker already with Death Touch. And it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So if your opponent wants to block him, they're going to have to block with 2 creatures, and odds are one of them is going to have to be a pretty decent creature. They don't want to lose as much, especially if you're able to attack and get this off 2 or even 3 times. So it becomes even more of a threat, and they're going to lose 2 creatures. And like I said, with the 1/1 counters, he's just going to come back. So it's a matter of whether or not they just block it, kill it just for it to come back. They lose a creature, we continue to have a creature. Slightly weaker, but still a creature. Next card is, of course we're running some blue, so we're going to run a little counter spells just to let us have that option. Such as Soul Manipulation. It's a black and a blue and 1 generic mana for an instant with choose one or both. Counter target creature spell and or return target creature card in your graveyard to your hand. First off, it lets us counter a spell. Second, it lets us go back and get a creature if we need it. Say they killed off one of our creatures before it could get a 1/1 counter back again on after it came back. This lets us go back into the graveyard and pull it back out. This gives us the option to. Now, for these 1/1 counters, we're going to, of course, run some proliferate stuff in here, such as Fuel for the Cause. 2 blue, 2 generic mana for an instant with counter target spell, so it's a hard counter, then proliferate. If you don't know what that is, it's you choose any number of permanents and or players with counters on them, then give each another counter of a kind already there. I wish we could run some Infect in here, but nah. It's not really a deck to run Infect with. So, this here will really help out with doubling our creatures. We just got to get 1 counter on them, and then we don't even have to attack to start giving them more counters. Now the next card here is Thrumming Bird. It's a blue and 1 generic mana for a 1/1 bird horror with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So here's what's going to happen. When it gets a chance to attack, it has flying. So it's got that evasion, so hopefully it'll deal damage. It attacks, it immediately becomes a 2/2. Then it deals damage, and it becomes a 3/3. Next turn we attack again, it becomes a 4/4. It deals damage and becomes a 5/5. And there's no telling what else it's doing to your other creatures. So with this proliferate, we're possibly able to put 1/1 counters, 2 of them, onto each of our creatures, each turn. Now the next card here is Volt Charge. He's a red and 2 generic mana for an instant. Deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Proliferate. Okay, you could possibly turn this around on yourself if you're ahead in life total and you need to get down to start activating your 1/1 counters. You could turn it around onto yourself or burn a creature out there or an opponent if it's possibly fatal damage or gets them close to it. And then you proliferate, so it just helps out. Now the next card here is Steady Progress. It's blue and 2 generic mana for an instant with proliferate and draw a card. It gives us some card advantage, and then we proliferate all our stuff. Simple. Now the next card here is Morg Toad. He's a black and 2 generic mana for a 2/2 frog. Sacrifice it, add a blue and a red to your mana pool. Okay, so what we can do with this is we can immediately attack with it when we are able to. Make it a 3/3. If they try to block it and kill it, we can immediately sacrifice it before the damage. And then it's already got the 1/1 counter on it. So, or if we want to stay ahead in life but we need the mana, sacrifice it, get the mana back, whatever. Or you can always just attack, wait till the next turn, sacrifice it, or attack it, and then sacrifice or something, and then it comes back, and then you can do this and continue to get 2 extra mana a turn, possibly every turn or every 2 turns. Next card here is Sapphire Drake. It goes really well in here. It's a blue and 5 generic mana for a 4/4 Drake with flying. Each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it has flying. It just gives all of our stuff there even better evasion, allows it to attack, allows it to get those counters, and then deal damage. In the late game, this is really well. If you play this in the late game, you could possibly immediately swing in for a lethal. Possibly. Now, the next card we have here is Ghost Form. He's a blue and 1 generic mana for an instant with 2 target creatures are unblockable this turn. It just lets us get in some damage, and all that we need to do. Yeah. It just lets us get in with damage if we want to deal damage. Or if we want to start doing some commander damage, we can attack in with Marchesa to give her a counter and make sure that she doesn't die. Now, we do have some stuff to protect Marchesa a little bit, such as Glint. Pay a blue and 1 generic mana for an instant. Target creature you control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Same thing with Dive Down, but it's just a blue. Now then, we're getting into our cards where we're going to sacrifice stuff, where we're going to get a little bit more. We're going to have 1/1 counter, so we're going to be able to sacrifice our creatures, and then they'll just come back. So technically we're not losing anything, such as Costly Plunder. We can pay a black and 1 generic mana for an instant. As an additional cost, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, draw 2 cards. We can immediately sacrifice a creature that has a 1/1 counter on it. It will come back and we'll still get card advantage. Same thing for Artillerize. You can sacrifice an artifact or a creature. It's a red 3 generic mana for an instant. If you sacrifice an artifact creature, it deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Now you can, of course, with these burn spells, you can turn them back onto you to keep you out of the lead with life. Like I said, you don't want to be in the lead of life, so this stuff can kind of help bring you down. Now then, Vivisection is really good in here. It's a blue 3 generic mana for a sorcery. As additional cost, sacrifice a creature. You draw 3 cards. It gives you 3 cards of card advantage, and then of course one of your creatures is going to come back because it's got a 1/1 counter on it. So it just really helps out with that stuff. Because we're not going to have this here's going to be where our creatures are going to die. So what we're going to need to do is we're not running any graveyard shenanigans really to bring stuff back. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to offset that with card draw, so we have our options and choices to use stuff. Because that could be just as good, and let's play a creature when we need it. Same thing for Merciless Resolve, a black and 2 generic mana for a instant. Sacrifice a creature, artifact, or land, draw 2 cards. Altar's Reap, black and 1 generic mana for an instant, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. Wait, did I already say no? Yeah, no, that's Costly Plunder. Bone Splinters, black. As an additional cost, sacrifice a creature, destroy target creature. It just lets us give us some removal on another creature if we need to. Now, this one doesn't really have much to do with the other kinds of categories I was talking about, but it's called Horror of the Dim. He's a black 4 generic mana for a 3/4 horror. You pay blue, it gains hexproof until end of turn. The reason why we run it is for that hexproof, because it only costs 1, and we can attack with it. Once it can attack for 5 mana, it attacks, it becomes a 4/5. It's a great blocker, and it can continue to get larger. And with that hexproof, we can keep our opponents from trying to remove it, so they're going to have to start to block it. So possibly we could kill a creature. Now, next card is Death Cult Rogue. This is where we get into our blockable creatures to make them powerful. You can pay 2 blue or 2 black or any combination of and 1 generic mana for a 2/2 human rogue. It can't be blocked except by rogues. So technically in this deck, that's 3 mana for a 3/3 unblockable. Because who's running rogues really? Now, next card here is Soulsworn Spirit. He's blue and 3 generic mana for a 2/1 spirit. He is unblockable. When he enters battlefield, detain target creature and opponent controls. So if you don't know what that is, it's until your next turn, that creature can attack or block and its activated abilities can't be activated. So it just gives us an option to stop an opponent's creature if that's the only thing they have, and then we can attack him with everything. Latchkey Seeker, 2 blue, 1 generic mana for a 3/1 spirit, and it's unblockable. Now we do play Toil and Trouble. Toil, it's a black and 2 generic mana for a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. That's going to be targeted towards us so that we can have the card draw and keep us below our opponents. If you really need to, you could play Trouble on yourself. It's a red and 2 generic mana. It deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. You could target towards you or an opponent. Now we're in the parts where we're going to lose our life. It's Painful Lesson. It's a black and 2 generic mana for sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Ravaging Oni Slave. He's a black and 1 generic mana for an Ogre Warrior 3/3. When it comes into play, you lose 3 life if you don't control a demon. We don't control demons, we don't play demons, so we're going to lose that 3 life, which is nothing wrong with that. Play it turn 2, gets us below all of our opponents so we can immediately attack and immediately get those counters. When it leaves play, if you lose 3 life if you don't control a demon. It doesn't matter. It's fine. And I mean, that's turn 3, you attack with this, that's a 4/4. And then it can continue to come back. Although this here is a possible card that could be a downfall for you. If it has a 1/1 counter, it could continue to come back and possibly kill you later in the game. It's the kind of creature that your opponents will basically let you hit them attack with, so that it gets the 1/1 counter, and then it comes back and hurts you. So you have to be careful with that kind of card. Now the next card here is Succumb to Temptation. It's 2 black and 1 generic mana for an instant. You draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. It just gives us more card advantage, and of course brings our life down below our opponents. Now the next card here is Hoarder's Greed. He's a black and 3 generic mana for a sorcery. You lose 2 life and draw 2 cards, then clash with an opponent. If you win, repeat this process. If you don't know what clashing is, it's each clashing player reveals the top card of his or her library, then puts that card on the top or bottom. A player wins if his or her card had a higher converted mana cost. So play against the guy who's playing the super big creatures, who's ramping out to drop down giant creatures as fast as possible. Play against them, continue to get card advantage, and then continue to lose life to get below everyone else. Now the next card we have here is Furnace Scamp. It's a red. This goes with for us wanting to attack. It's a red for a 1/1 beast. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. If you do, it deals 3 damage to that player. So you play it turn 1, immediately you attack for 2 damage. If it hits, it's immediately 5 damage. If you want to sacrifice it, and then it comes back at your end step, and then you can attack it again. We play it in here because it's a very dangerous card. Because with Marchesa, if you're always behind on the life, you can attack, and that's a continuous 5 damage. Now the next card we run in here is Cathari Bomber. He's a black and 1 red. He's a black, a red, and 1 generic mana for a 2/2 bird shaman with flying. When he deals combat damage to a player, put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens into play and sacrifice Cathari Bomber. You can play the Unearth ability, which is some graveyard stuff to get back, which actually goes very well. You can pay a black, a red, 3 generic mana. You return this card from your graveyard to play. It gains haste. Remove it from the game at the end of turn, or if it would leave play, Unearth only as a sorcery. So you can immediately attack. You can attack. It's a 3/3 flyer. Deals damage. We get 2 blockers. It will come back because of the 1/1 counters and continue to give us blockers as it attacks. Now we're into the 1/1 counter section, such as Stormkirk Patrol. He's a black for generic mana for a 4/3 vampire soldier. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. So it immediately attacks, it becomes a 5/4. If it deals damage, it then becomes a 6/5. So that there can become a very big threat very fast. That's why we run it. And even if Marchesa isn't on the field immediately, it still gets a 1/1 counter if it hits. And then when Marchesa comes back, and then it dies, it doesn't matter. Bloodcrazed Neonate. It's a red and 1 generic mana for a 2/1 vampire. It attacks each turn of Able. Whenever it deals combat damage to player, put 1/1 counter on it. So this card will have to attack each turn. That's the only downside to it. But it will of course activate our raid abilities and such. It attacks immediately for 2 mana, becomes a 3/2. If it deals damage, it becomes a 4/3. So not bad. And that's only in 1 turn that it attacks. Now the next card here is Erdwall Ripper. He's 2 red, 1 generic mana for a 2/1 vampire with haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Same thing as before. Haste. It attacks. It immediately becomes a 3/2. If it deals damage, it becomes a 4/3. Falkenrath Exterminator. He's a red, 1 generic mana for a 1/1 vampire archer. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on him. You can pay a red, 2 generic mana. He deals damage to target creature equal to the number of 1/1 counters on him. So you can attack as soon as he comes in. If he deals damage, he becomes a 3/3. Then you can pay 3 mana to bolt a creature. Then you can continue to attack. And since it's not a tap ability, you can attack. He continues to get the 1/1 counters. Then if he deals damage, gets 2. Basically, if he attacks and then deals damage, he gets 2 1/1 counters a turn. And then you can pay 3 mana to continuously hurt your opponent's creatures and get them out of the way. And the next card is Heirs of Stormkirk. He's 2 red, 2 generic mana for a 2/2 vampire with Intimidate. When it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on them. Same thing as before. Slith Strider. He's 2 blue, 1 generic mana for a 1/1 Slith. Whenever he becomes blocked, draw a card. So there's a blocker. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. So we can immediately attack, becomes a 3/3. That's already a decent blocker. That's everything. I didn't make a land base for this yet. It's really a simple way to make a land base on this kind of deck. Largely, you're going to be more of a black heavy deck. Probably running about 15 swamps, 13 islands, and then like somewhere around 10 or 12 actual mountains in this kind of deck. And then, of course, your regular dual lands. Sorry if this one wasn't the best one. Today's been kind of crazy. Been running around all around town, all around the house today doing stuff. I was going to do a video earlier and take some time. The power kept going off and had no power, and it would flick on, then go off, no power, and so on. And it kept messing with the internet and all that stuff. Alright, so tell me what you guys think. I should be getting in a Aether Revolt bundle. Got it for like $30. So it should be coming in at the latest. Sometime in the midweek next week. Alright. Thanks for watching. Tell me what you guys think. I'll have another video for y'all tomorrow. Sorry this one wasn't all that great and all that stuff. Today's just been a little wild and crazy, and I've been all over the place today, but I still wanted to get out a video. Alright, thanks.